for Admissions and Financial Aid at McGeorge School of Law, obviously part of University of the Pacific. I've been with the university for about 8 years now, and I'm so grateful to Marche and Chris for including me in this conversation. I didn't have a chance to actually participate in the first cultural humility session, but I did watch it, and there were lots of things to learn and to be thoughtful about. And so I'm so excited to actually be working with Dr. Wardell here. So I'm gonna do a quick bio, and I actually have to read something that's gonna embarrass her from a colleague of hers at USF that I hope will set the tone. So many of you know Dr. Wardell. She serves as the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer and Vice Provost at the University of San Francisco and President of the San Francisco Public Library Commission. Recognized as the 2017 most influential woman by the San Francisco Business Times, she brings 25 years of experience as an executive leader in academic affairs, student affairs, community engagement, and equity and inclusion. Dr. Wardell also teaches in the USF School of Education and in the MBA program at the USF School of Management. Her courses include race and diversity in higher education, organizational behavior, diversity, inclusion, and bias, and transformative leadership. Vice Provost Wardell has a doctorate from Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Education and Psychology, a master's in counseling and social justice education from San Diego State University, go Aztecs, and a bachelor's in communications from the College of Pacific at the University of the Pacific. Dr. Wardell is an expert on gender and race and women in leadership, and recently released her first book, Twice as Good, Leadership and Power for Women of Color, available now wherever books are sold. And I saw it on Amazon, so it's in my cart, ready to hit purchase very soon. And then quickly, I wanted to share this because a colleague reached out to me and we got into a conversation about you, Doctor. And this is what she had to say, which I think exemplifies who you are. She said that basically she was finding it hard to describe what you meant to the USF community and to her personally. She's a visionary, timeless, and tireless advocate for justice. She's a mentor, an educator, and a friend. Each day she moves our institution and our world closer to the reality of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. Each day she gives us each the courage towards better versions of ourselves. So that makes me tear up. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Dr. Wardell.
Dean Simmons, you got me. You didn't tell me you were saying all that, and I'm gonna find out who you spoke with. Fellow alumni, it's exciting to be back with you again. The University of the Pacific is so important in my journey and my formation of understanding what does ethical leadership mean, how is it enacted in the world, and I'm just so grateful for those precious years that I was there in community with our beautiful university. It's so great to be back again with those of us that have completed that particular portion of our journey. And we're out in the world, and hopefully we are not only leading our best lives for us, but we're doing it for other people as well. Rumain Brisbane, Jermaine Reed, George Mann, Matthew Ajodabe, Frank Smart, Natasha McKenna, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, Maya Hall, Philip White, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, William Chapman II, Alexia Christian, Brendan Glenn, Victor Manuel La Rosa, Jonathan Sanders, Freddie Blue, Joseph Mann, Salvador Ellswood, Sandra Bland, Albert Joseph Davis, Darius Stewart, Billy Ray Davis, Samuel Du Bois, Michael Sabi, Brian Keith Day, Christian Taylor, Troy Robinson, Ashams Farrow Manley, Felix Kumai, Keith Harrison McLeod. Junior Prosper, Lamontez Jones, Patterson Brown, Dominique Hutchinson, Anthony Ashford, Alonzo Smith, Tyree Crawford, India Kager, Levante Biggs, Michael Lee Marshall, Jamar Clark, Richard Perkins, Nathaniel Harris Pickett, Benny Lee Tegnor, Miguel Espinal, Michael Noel, Kevin Matthews, Betty Jones, Quintonio Legrier, Keith Childress Jr., Janet Wilson, Randy Nelson, Antoine Scott, Wendell Celestine, David Joseph, Kaylin Rockamore, Deshaun Perkins, Christopher Davis. Marco Loud, Peter Gaines, Tori Robinson, Darius Robinson, Kevin Hicks, Mary Trujillo, DeMarcus Simmer, Willie Tillman, Terrell Thomas, Sylvia Smith, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher, Paul O'Neill, Alteria Woods, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Ronell Foster, Stefan Clark, and Antoine Rose II. Eric Garner, John Crawford III, Michael Brown, Ezell Ford, Dante Parker, Michelle Cousseau, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Ake Gurley, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Bathon Jean, Pamela Turner, Dominique Clayton, Atiana Jefferson, Christopher Whitfield, Christopher McCorvey, Eric Reason, Michael Lorenzo Dean, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, David McAtee, and George Floyd. This is a non-comprehensive list of the deaths of African Americans at the hands of the police since Eric Garner's death in 2014. So the names that were read were Black identified individuals. That is not comprehensive. And the names that I gave you was within a 10-year period of time. It does not include ones that have not been responded to, and it's not comprehensive. And so I begin our time together by saying their names, because when people talk about racial justice and they talk about the prospect of reconciliation, if you do not understand the gravity of the situation that we're experiencing as a nation, and if you do not understand that it's not only Black males, but Black women as well as Black children that are dying disproportionately and clearly, awfully by the hands of the police, and to what degree we do not know, because those that have not been captured on tape. Part of the work that we have as alumni is to understand what is our place in all of this. And so what I tried to do is that last time I created a PowerPoint, and to be quite honest, I didn't have the, I just didn't have it to do another PowerPoint around these issues. I have been engaged in conversations of race and racial justice on both my own institutional level. I have responded to emails and phone calls and texts, oftentimes from individuals who are leaders in the community. Boards that I work on, I have read more deans as well as other leaders' messages before they went out, just to ensure that the message is honest enough and is truthful enough, and to ensure that that they understand who their constituents are, and that to not write it for the institution, but to write it for the people who need it the most. And I have been talking on two national webinars since the last time I was here with Pacific. And this morning I was on a call with all the 28 Jesuit institutions in the US on what is our role right now as institutions that are mission aligned, mission driven, and mission conscious. And what are we going to do with the precious mission that we know that we have to make the world a better place. And so I am here with you today as fellow Pacific alum, as Tigers, because I responded to the call of my fellow colleagues in the alumni office. As you know, this was originally supposed to be a part 2 of a cultural humility session. But we knew that that was not right. And one of the things we immediately did was that I said, we have to just create a space to have some conversations about race. And so I just want to say that whatever I say now is going to be incomplete because the time we have allotted is not even a full hour. And yesterday I did a microaggressions 101 training for faculty and staff at USF. And my team that did the registration, I said, you got to close it. And the next time we can't do a Zoom meeting, we got to do a webinar because it's too mmany people that are trying to seek education and support. And I think that's a great thing. And at the same time, it creates a lot of, if I will just go ahead and call it what it is, it creates a lot of burden for those of us who are Black identified, who are African Americans, working for mission-centered institutions as we try to carry our institutions, knowing that there's so much pain that we carry ourselves as we are personally implicated in so much of the tragedy that's happening in the communities. And so I've jotted down a few things that I want to share. And then I want to end in a prayer that I want to offer for us to be thinking about. And then I want to move into some time so that Dean Simmons and I can have some conversation and maybe some questions and answers. So one of the goals today that I'm hoping is that we as Pacific alumni might find a way to dedicate ourselves to understanding what is happening now and to do it in a way that we will commit ourselves to understanding what racial injustice is, because you can't work for racial justice if you don't understand what racial injustice is. So there's a part of this that is a dedication. I want us to dedicate ourselves, and for some of us, I want us to rededicate ourselves to it. The other purpose of our time together is I want to cultivate this spirit of what I call honesty, being honest, first of all, with ourselves. And that can only happen through truth-telling and through vulnerability. And I think that as a nation, but as a group of educated alumni from institutions such as ours, we have both a duty and a responsibility as stewards where we are located to understand this in a vulnerable way so that we might be able to model that vulnerable behavior for others that we oversee. And the third thing that I'm hoping that we can do as an outcome of today is that I want to compel us to do better. And I want to specifically name that there's both an opportunity and an obligation for all of us, but there is a specific opportunity and an allegation for individuals who are not Black, who are not African American. And even more specifically, I think there is both a duty and an obligation, a compelling obligation for our white identified colleagues and friends and neighbors. And so this is part of the work that I want to talk with you today about. And so first things first is that I want to say that racism in America is not Black people's problems, even though I just read the names of those that have lost their lives at the hands of those that are to protect them, it is not and it has never been a Black person's problem. And it's interesting because whenever there's any type of racist incident or any type of racist behavior or any type of racist engagement in institutions, is oftentimes those who are Black or African American are often the ones that are not only responded, and in my case, it is my job to respond. And so I'm a chief equity officer. And so my job is to build capacity and to help my institution to do better. But also we see that happening with people who work in the business office or people who work in the admissions office in my institution, because I work at a university, or people who just happen to be frontline workers in the various areas, regardless of their positionality. And one of the things that I want to say is that this is not the problem of Black people, racism in America. This is a problem with how we have not responded and understood our place in this work. If you're interested, I would ask that you look at a post that I wrote, an article I wrote on LinkedIn this week. And it talks a little bit about some of my thoughts of what I see is needed right now. And I'm going to incorporate some of those things here, but I'm going to let that piece stand alone by itself. And I invite you to go to my LinkedIn page. Just look up my name and you can see the article that I wrote about the need for not just allies, but how we need transformative allies. And it's a term that I came up with and that there's a description on my LinkedIn on what a transformative ally is. One of the things that I want to say today, particularly because we work in mission-centered and mission-aligned organizations, is that racism is a soul sickness. It is one of the things that is preventing us as a nation and as institution and as people to fulfilling our highest purpose. And one of the ways in which we need to be able to understand that racism is a soul sickness is beginning to see our place in racism in and of itself. One of the things that I think that is important for us to begin to talk about is the way we currently frame racism. Fundamentally, the problem with every individual that I work with, and I try to help them move beyond in my own work, is a frame of individualism that has caused us to not be able to move forward and to make the changes that we need. This current frame of individualism focuses on what I call there's a few bad apples. And because there's a few bad apples, that those individuals operate consciously and they engage in bad behavior. And their intentions are to be mean. And because of that, there is no way that individuals can find themselves in that. And that particular frame of being individualized in behavior, that's behavior that is conscious, behavior that is intentional, is what will keep us from ever moving forward on this issue. And I'll tell you this, and I'll share with you a story that I shared with some of my USF colleagues last week. We did a vigil where about 800 alumni, students, faculty, and staff were online and joined us in this vigil for racial justice and reconciliation. And one of the things that I shared was that how I had spent a lifetime navigating and negotiating and working with the Amy Coopers in my life, in my experience, and And one of the things, for those of you that are not familiar, which I would imagine not very many people are, all of you are familiar with, Amy Cooper was the woman who found herself in an unfortunate situation. I'm sure she feels to have been filmed, and her interactions with an African-American male who um, uh, coincidentally had the same last name as she did, Christian Cooper, was able to kind of document what those of us that have been engaged in organizations for a long time have seen as and experienced as the weaponizing of whiteness, to silence us, to keep us in our place, to use authority, and in this case, it was obviously the New York PD, but whatever authority that it may be, whether it be authority in an organization, it may be a manager, it may be a vice president, it may be whatever, but how that was used so plainly. And when that went viral, all of us that are African Americans knew exactly what had happened because we had experienced that so often in our careers. We had experienced it so often in our lives, and the difficult thing is that we couldn't, to try to explain it to another white colleague, to try to help them understand the racialized dynamics in organizations and the racialized dynamics in society, in which there is this hierarchy that is invisible, and that this idea that people are racist, and that systems are not racist, that the institutions are not racist. It was so hard to explain that to individuals until they saw Amy Cooper. And one of the things is that I told everybody that was on the call, I said, if you're white, I said, you have engaged in Amy Cooper behavior at a time in your life that you have not known it. It's been unconscious, as it was unconscious to her. It was unknowingly, as it was unknowingly to her. It was, you can't say it was unintentional, because it was intentional, but yet, had it not been for the recording, when both parties were to give their stories, the likelihood, based upon the history and the evidence and the patterns that we know, we can pretty much assume which story would have a higher weight, which story would be believable, which story would be believed. And the reason why I use Ms. Cooper as an example for us, to help illuminate some of the slayings and the experiences of racism and inequality and inequity in the country that has caused to all the civil unrest and the days and the weeks now of protest, is that there is an invisible structure to most white people around racism that they can't see, they can't touch, and because of that, they can deny it. They will resist that it exists. They will ask you to prove that it exists. They put the burden of proof on Black people and other people of color. And that has been the construct of the racism that you see now playing out, not only obviously plainly in law enforcement, but I'm here to tell you, as a professional executive woman, a Black woman, and a Black mother, it plays out in K-12 schools, it plays out in higher education, it plays out in every industry that we work in finance industry, it plays out in technology industry, it plays out in construction, it plays out in regardless of whatever it is that you do. It can even play out in even the very best entrepreneurial endeavors. This kind of unseen and unconscious and unintentional, and it's all those UNs, the uns is what makes it so difficult, because what it does then is that if you can't prove it, then I don't believe it. If I don't see it, then I can't be a participant in it. And when you layer that in with this individual frame, this current frame that we cannot break among our white colleagues, that racism is an individual, it's just bad apples. It's not a system. It can't possibly be present in an institution that has a strong mission, that has a strong mission statement, that has strong values, that has good values, that has programs in place, may have affinity groups. It can't possibly be present. But the thing, though, is that it is present, and Black employees have been saying it for years. Black students have been saying these things for years, as well as our Latinx, our Asian American, our Indigenous, and other communities of color. And so my comments are really around taking us to several questions, which I think are the crux of the matter that we're going to have to deal with if we seek to, as an alumni group, to do better in this area. So this is the question that I have gotten time and time again, and this is a beloved question. I take this with love. I take this as an honor and a privilege that people come to me and they say simply, Mary, what do I do? Mary, what can I do? What should I do now? And I hear it from people from all levels of institutions. And that's not the response I normally give, but I'm going to give a response that I actually am thinking, even when I don't give them when I'm telling them some ideas and some things that I think that they should do, which I will do with us before we get to the next phase. This is what Mary is thinking in the back of her mind. So when they say, Mary, what do I do? Or what should I do? In my mind, I'm thinking, what is it about your life that has allowed you to be a full functioning adult, to have the education that you have, to have the leadership position that you hold, with all the budgets that you oversee, to be a homeowner, to be a contributing participant in your community and in society, and not know what to do about racism? What is it about the choices that you've made in your life that you don't know the answer of what to do? And then I'm thinking, how have you managed to get this far in your leadership roles and not know about racism? How have you been able to be successful and not know some basic tenets about the histories of the people you serve, that you don't understand the histories of America, that you don't understand these constructs, and that instead of asking questions such as, what is causing young people, a multi-generational, multiracial group of individuals in every American city and every major city globally pour out into the streets with this recent string of events, and how George Floyd has activated the pain and suffering of indifference. And you might be the person in the room or on the chat or whatever that says, but what about the looting? Why are people looting? And my response, as I'm working with people, because I have to work with folks lovingly, and I'm thinking to myself, what is it about the choices that you've made and what you read? What is it about the choices that you've made and where you live? What is it about the choices that you've made and how you engage these ideals of equity and inclusion? You know, in my faith tradition, the Bible talks about individuals who have a form of godliness, but who deny the power thereof. So How does that translate to a time like this? Individuals who have a form of being committed to these ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they say the right things. They actually will, on the surface, it all sounds and looks good. But when you go scratch underneath it, these questions, what do I do now, reveals that they actually have never done the work. That they have never taken the time to really understand, why are there so many cries in the street? Why are people feeling marginalized? What are the structures that have led to that? What is redlining? Do we know what redlining is? Do we understand the ways in which the Voting Rights Act has been chipped away, that has caused thousands and thousands of people to not be able to participate in the democracy? Do we understand the ways in which the health disparities, particularly among Black, Latinx, and Indigenous children, do we know the mortality rate of Black babies born to college-educated Black women? There is a whole report on that the New York Times did that would blow people away, because you would think that education allows to higher successes, such as in health outcomes and other things. But if you start to look at the health disparities, you'll see that there's racialized outcomes in that. There's racialized outcomes clearly in education. And there's racialized outcomes in the economics of America. You look at the average wealth of a Black family, and you look at the average wealth of a Black college graduate, someone that has earned a bachelor's degree in the United States, and you put that against any white family, and you'll see these disparities. And you'll see the disparities even if they've gone into the same profession. Could be engineering, it could be finance, it could be technology. There's these disparities. That doesn't happen because of a few bad apples. And it doesn't happen because a group of people continues to make the same mistake over and over again. It happens is because that we have a system of racism that has been perpetuated because those that are institutional actors, and particularly those who are white over the years that are key institutional actors, the leaders of cities, the leaders of industry, the titans of industry, the leaders of anchor institutions such as universities, they have been institutional actors to allow this disparity to continue generation after generation. And that has been because those institutional actors have not had enough of a critical mass of other white institutional actors who would have their back, whether they were board of trustees individuals, individuals who had their back, that when they took steps to try to correct instances of institutionalized racism, they would always get pushbacks. And so what we have seen is that there is this institutional actors are part and parcel of the outcomes that we continue to see, because the only way we change these things is that those that have both the education, those who have the positionality, and those who have the platform. I have a platform right now. You guys, each one of us have a platform. How do we use what we have to make change? And so this work is really about institutional actors, whether you are an institutional actor in your business, in your community, in your industry, if you're an institutional actor in policy development on the municipality level, the state level, or the federal level. It's about institutional actors, but particularly it's a calling. This is a calling for all the white institutional actors, people of good conscience, of how they're going to use, how we're going to use their power and their privilege to work against anti-Black racism and to center those issues and those needs in ways that only they can. And to do it for a sense of solidarity, to be unified with communities of color, to be unified with Black people, and to do and to recognize that now's the time to do it. I can see that we're 12:38, so I'm going to probably end my comments there. But I will say this very quickly: how far we go down on this road to redemption really does depend on our white colleagues, on our white friends, and how they will respond in this monumental time of white supremacy and white conditioning, and have the courage to push back and push through that, and not ask the question to their Black friends, what should I do next, but educate themselves. And one of the things I'll share with the alumni leaders is that there's so many lists that are being run by the New York Times, by the Atlantic, I'll share you the list that I'm giving to all my faculty, staff, students, and alumni that goes through ways in which individuals could work for racial justice, and some basic readings. Some of them are basic articles, some of them are knockout books that will help you understand what these issues are, to go beyond the surface, to get more sophisticated in your understanding of race, because we need our institutional actors to get sophisticated in this area. We need our institutional actors to understand that they actually have a duty and a responsibility as stewards of institutions to do the right thing. And this work of racial justice and reconciliation, you know, reconciliation is a twofold process. You can't have reconciliation without truth. And you can't do the truth piece unless you do the acknowledgement. So, you know, before we get to reconciliation, we got to do that acknowledgement piece. We got to do that a lot of heavy lifting of education. And that's the reason why I think I got an email right before I got in here that there's like a couple hundred people want to be in my microaggressions one-on-one session next week, you know, because I think that they heard the call and they're trying to get educated. And I will say this because I believe this about Pacific, as I believe it about my current institution, USF. Part of our work in our lifetime, I believe this is the work of my lifetime, is that we have both a duty and a responsibility to enact the beloved community. And we do that through our places of worship. We do that through our communities. We do it through our places of employment. We can only enact the beloved community if we participate in the shared sense of understanding that those who are on the margins have got to be brought to the center. And that those whose needs that we have left behind have got to be put at the forefront of our agendas. And whatever it is that we do, that we have to find a way to do that in our neighborhood groups, as well as in our organizations. And the more budget and people you oversee, the greater your responsibility. The bigger your organization and the higher your position, the greater your responsibility is. And if you're one of those influential people, if you happen to be, you're like, I don't work anymore, but I'm super influential, you have a lot, those individuals have a lot of responsibility. Use your influence for racial justice. Use it to help colleagues and friends teach their children about racism and how to be an anti-racist, and look at the materials that are available. There's wonderful materials for children right now. Make sure your teens understand this. Have those conversations in your families. Because sometimes I don't spend a lot of my time, this is a little secret, I don't spend a lot of my time on people that are older, that is really difficult for them to move forward. And that doesn't mean that I have given up hope on them. It's just as that it's not the best use of my limited energy. I spend most of my time, obviously, you can see I've dedicated my life to college students and serving university students. So I spend most of my time on students, and then I spend most of my time on helping young people that are coming up, because then I can help them in their racialized formation. If they're a young white student taking a class or in any session, we can help them in their racialized formation. And so one of the things is that I want to ask all of you, wherever you are at or entering this conversation, is to think about, what is my racialized formation? Where did I learn about race? Who taught me about race? When was the first time that I had a Black teacher, if I ever had a Black teacher? What did that communicate to me as a school-age child or adolescent? What was my wedding invitation like? Did I have any Black friends that came to our wedding? What has been the ways in which I have engaged and tried to create relationships that can make a difference, that are authentic, that are real? How have I engaged as just as a Pacific alum, as a person of conscience, to working against these issues of racial injustice? I think there's an invitation for us right now to look at our lives and to reflect on our lives so that we can answer that question that I am thinking when people ask me, Mary, what should I do? What is it about your life that leads you to not know about these issues? And so I'm going to turn it over to Dean Simmons at this time.
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that I want to say and tons of things I want to ask. I'm hoping that the participants will share their questions in the chat. I don't know where to start now. I had notes and now I'm like, there's so many more things. In the midst of this, I already shared your transformative article on LinkedIn because I think that's super powerful and impactful. So I guess I'll start there in terms of allyship.
Yes.
I think that your point about your, African-American colleagues being exhausted is very, very on point. And there are tons of articles out there, but I do feel that we have people in our spaces that are genuinely trying to think of something different to do.
Absolutely.
And so if when you have that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes to have a conversation or share one thing, that someone who may not be new to this conversation, but is also being thoughtful about being anti-racist, which I would like to get to next. What would you share? What's the one thing that you would have this group walk away from thinking about?
Well, my guess is that people who sign up for these types of discussions are allies. And so allies they already know that there's something wrong about this whole situation. Yes. They're usually the ones that when they see something like this, they're like, okay, I need to sign up for this. And so I have a different conversation with my allies than I do necessarily with people who want to be allies or are trying to figure it out. My conversation with allies is that now is your time, as Martin Luther King said, now is the time that we cannot have the silence of our friends. Now is the time for allies to kind of step into your unique positionality, your unique power, your unique privilege. And if you read my article that I wrote about, and it's actually in my book, Twice as Good, it's the whole chapter 5 is dedicated to this notion of becoming a transformative ally. And a transformative ally is not like a sponsor, like there's this whole mentor sponsorship. A transformative ally is somebody who literally runs interference if they need to, like a linebacker. A transformative ally will quietly, without telling anybody, without telling the person what they did, clear the way so that whatever it is going on in the organization, whatever it is that needs to happen, they're going to contribute to it. They're going to rebuke appropriately to people that they feel like they need to rebuke. They're going to call things out. They're going to elevate consciousness. They're going to leverage what I call all their social capitals. They're going to leverage their social capital. They're going to leverage their economic capital. Sometimes it might cost them a little something. They're going to leverage their positionality
Mm-hmm.
that now is the time to use your position. If you have a platform, because you know people respond to you. Everybody knows how people respond to people in positions. We've all been conditioned that way. You know, so what position do you hold that you have not used fully for the purposes of realizing racial justice? Have you, if you have a whole group of people reporting to you, have you adopted a book reading group where everybody's reading a disruptive book around whiteness to help people think about anti-racism? There are so many books out right now, and I'm going to include those.
Thank
A
you.
whole list. I'm going to send those to you. I'm going to send them to Chris, and
Okay.
I'm going to send a whole list of them, okay?
Thank you. People are
But
asking in the chat, so it's perfect.
that is one of the most important things you can do right now. And if I can open up the document on my desktop, because I'll start naming some of the titles. But there are some, now's the time to start reading stuff. There's a article that was written by someone in my network. He's out of Fordham University. His name is Dr. Massengale. He's a professor of theology. He wrote a beautiful piece. You know, I work in a Jesuit Catholic institution, but Pacific also comes out of a religious Protestant, you know, faith upbringing as well. So, you know, these institutions are very much alike. Father Maskingale wrote a beautiful piece that was published in the National Catholic Reporter, NCR, about what we need to do right now, but particularly what do white colleagues need to do right now. And I'm going to include that as well to Chris. So when Chris sends out the recording, he's going to also have some, and Marche send it out, they're going to have a document that they can also include as well. Brian, his name is Brian with a Y. Massengale. He wrote something this past week on the next things for white people to do right now. And I think his piece is short, but very impactful. But read.
And there are lots of questions about, are you going to share resources? So yes. For everybody in the chat, that's going to happen, as you just heard. So my next question, I don't see another. Someone's asking, what do these readings entail? And I don't know if you want to answer that, but I mean, the idea would be that you're educating yourself about the issues that were presented today, but also just kind of what's going on in our society. Is that accurate? Absolutely.
You know, Michelle Alexander, who wrote an opinion piece this last weekend in the New York Times, she's the author of the New Jim Crow. So someone can jot that in there.
Yes, that's it.
If you ever want to understand, she's a lawyer, as Dean Simmons is. If you really want to understand how we have got to where we are now, there's going to be books that will take you through the whole process, and there's books that are going to deal with certain parts of it. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, it's a commitment to read. But if you're entering this work and you really want to understand how race and racism has developed in these United States, you will read that. Also on my list is the 1619 Project, which is a series of essays that dealt with the 400 years in which 1619 was when the first Africans were brought to what is now we know as the United States, but would be the early colonies. And it tells kind of the story of what has happened from 1619 to now. And it's really, and it's all, because it's a series of essays. And so what I've done is that I put together books, I put together essays and real short reads, depending on where people are at. And then, you know, right now on PBS, Anna Deavere Smith, I got a chance to do a study with Anna Deavere Smith. And she has a special on right now. She did it after the 1992 Rodney King riots. And it was a one-woman. She's a phenomenal theatrical storyteller. And she has a piece that's running right now on the internet as well as on PBS. That PBS has re-released and is actually going through its vault right now and re-releasing some pieces that are really helpful. And I'm sorry that I don't have that list in front of me, but I will have all those for you.
So I'm going to combine a question from Alyssa with one of my questions. So I'm going to read the whole thing. How do we deal with our white peers that do not believe in the existence of racism and brutality within our nation? How do you feel about cutting people out who refuse to be open to anti-racist actions? Because I had a question around anti-racism, because I feel like for many people, this is really the first that they're really hearing the difference between someone saying I'm not racist versus being anti-racist. But I think Alyssa's questions are more important.
So the question is, how do we deal with our white peers that do not believe in the existence of racism?
And brutality.
And brutality. Well, if they do not believe in it, all you can do is ask them to read and to educate themselves. If people refuse to educate themselves, they're communicating a lot to you. They're communicating to you that they actually are resistant to the ideas that they're just resistant to the ideas. And part of the issue with that is that then we all have to make decisions. How much time and effort do you put in people who are blatantly and persistently not interested in learning? You notice that the call that I said, the purpose of this was to call on our Pacific alumni because of who we are and what our education has provided us for. I'm not making any, I'm not under any pretense that everybody is an educated individual in regard to these issues and is interested in being that. And they may even have, formal degrees. And so when you encounter that, Alyssa, one of the things you're going to have to do is that at some point you're going to have to make a decision. You'll have these resources that are made available to you, that you can make available to people. If the resistance is based upon their earlier lived experiences, and they need to have more information, and they're willing to engage that new information, then you have something to work with. If it's based upon a set of ideals and values that they have that is immobile, and they're not interested in learning, because one of the key things in all of this is that everybody has to learn more. And if you have people who are not willing to learn, then you got to then take that energy and you got to focus on people who are willing to learn. It's unfortunate, but I've been doing diversity work for so long that you do not throw your pearls to swine. That's another biblical term, meaning that you don't keep throwing the best that you have. You don't throw gold. You keep giving them gold and they keep throwing mud back at you. You just, at that point, you just kind of, love them for the human being that they are, and then recognize that they're not going to be a part of the reconciliation that makes our country a better place.
Powerful and impactful. Thank you. So another question is how, in your last talk, you broke down, this is from Mike, he said you broke down the difference between inclusion and equity. Can you share that again for people who are not on last time? And similarly, I would love for you to talk about what you talked about in the last session, that you said something about disrupting what we think we already know. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was just so powerful because I could see in the space of what Alyssa was just speaking to, but also just this idea of wanting to educate ourselves and spinning our wheels in terms of educating those who don't want to be educated. There is this idea of disruption, and some people are not comfortable with that and having to acknowledge that.
Well, this idea, I don't have the visual in front of me. was going from meeting to meeting, so I wasn't able to get everything lined up the way that I had hoped to be. But equality is actually, in a time like this, the enemy of equity. And I say that with a clear mind and a clear heart, that the principles of equality are actually a danger to the demands of equity. And what I mean by that is that equality in and of itself has been the focus of all of our work. And as children, we were taught that to be equal was the most important thing in everything that we can do. The issue with equality, though, is that you can't solve deeply embedded problems, deeply embedded challenges. You can't solve disproportionate outcomes in health and economics and education that were based upon racist policies, i.e., whether it was the Chinese Exclusion Act, whether it was Jim Crow, whether it is a range of things that we have experienced in our country, and our institutions grew up in that. You can't move into the space of equality and think that all of those injustices and all of those disproportionate outcomes and all of those years, 400 years of not leveling the playing field, specifically for African Americans, that all of a sudden you have a equal principle and that all things are going to be okay. Equity demands that institutions do more for those who need it most. And I'll say that again. The demands of equity are that you seek to do more for those who need it most. And so you can take any of those issues, any of those disproportionate outcomes, economics, education, health, and a myriad of other ones. Who has been impacted the most by our racist policies of redlining, by the racist ways in which we did predatory loans to certain communities, and particularly targeting communities of color, the ways in which we have had different tax bases for children that created desegregated schools even long after Brown v. Board of Education desegregated schools based upon the amount of funding that children have per pupil that leads to disproportionate outcomes of children in schools, Black and brown children, that persists deeply throughout the state of California today as it did 20 years ago. How do you deal with those things if your approach is equal? Equality cannot solve those problems. And so the demands of equity is that those who have both a duty and responsibility, policymakers, leaders, they have to then look at the issues that are before them, and they have to make an equitable decision-making process. They gotta look at what do we need to do now to ameliorate, to mitigate the past vestiges of racism, the past vestiges of sexism. What is it that we have to do to go further to create the level playing field? And there's a very famous image that you can find if you Google it. You can say, put equality versus equity, and you'll see like little children or people on these boxes. And you can see how equality seems like everyone is okay because everyone's standing on the same size box. But you'll see that one of the individuals is still not able to have access to, in this case, it's a baseball game. They still can't see the baseball game because even though whatever gesture you did that was equal was not enough for that individual based upon the history of underrepresentation, based upon the history of segregation, based upon the histories of redlining, based upon the histories of the difficulties of voting. And so all of those things kinds of creates a system of inequality, but you can't address inequality by coming up with trying to be equal. You can only address inequality through the principles and the demands of equity. Oh, thank you. Oh, I got some support here.
I was trying, who found it? I was trying to find it too.
Thank you.
I took a picture of it yesterday because I was so excited to see it because it makes so much sense.
Does that make sense? So to the person that asked that question, these are complex to nuanced principles, but at the same time, they're quite simple. And this is what we're being asked to right now. So to work against anti-racism would mean that you would work toward equity. You can't be all about equality and think that you're going to meet the goals of people that have been left behind disproportionately in any way.
No, very impactful.
And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
So we're at 104.
Okay, we're supposed to be over at 1 o'clock?
I thought it was 105,
okay.
But we need to know, do you have another 5 minutes or so?
I do.
Or?
I do.
Okay, so
go ahead.
One question that came up was about, so I guess this is for the alumni events group. Someone asking about is there going to be another part of this series or seminars. I'll let you guys answer that in the chat. But a question from someone in the chat was about how do you get educated people to change their racist minds since they believe in sect division by either race, ethnicity, or religion. And so, I mean, I feel like that's one of the things you initially kind of talked about and then went over a little bit later in terms of that you choose to spend your energy on working with those who at least have some basic premise of understanding that we are in a state of crisis. This has been a problem for 401 years. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, this is the last piece I forgot to mention, and this is for Kamjet. Thank you for asking that question. So this is another crux of the matter in all of this. Those institutional actors and those transformative allies, those institutional actors who decide to become transformative allies, they have to hold people accountable who choose not to fulfill the values of the business that they run, who choose not to behave in a way that is in line to the organization that they lead or the department that they oversee or the division. Those institutional actors, those organizational actors, they actually have to hold folks accountable. Now, there's no way to hold people accountable and they're just kind of out there doing the former thing I said, then you can't really do much. But if they're in an organizational context and there's a whole lot of people that need to work, we're social beings. And so if we're not working, we're in houses of worship, we're in community groups, we're in fraternities and sororities, we're in associations. Human beings don't function without being in membership and in communion with each other around something. If you are part of any of those groups and you happen to be an individual that has some sense of institutional authority or organizational authority, you can decide by what you write as far as statements. You'll know who's in and who's reluctant and who's out right away. The reluctant people, the goal is to bring them in, to help them to be educated. And the people that are, I call the holdouts, sometimes they'll make decisions about whether or not they want to be a part of that community anymore. Or they may decide that they want to get baptized and try to understand how they might be able to work for issues of justice that they may not have ever worked for before, and that there's enough love in the community and that's enough support in the organization to help them through that. And so a lot of this, what happens next is going to be dependent upon the goodwill and the courage of people who can.
Yes.
It's going to be really a lot. What happens, I feel like the democracy of the United States is really hanging in the balance of baby boomers and millennials that are in these key roles right now. These they're key institutional actors. They got resources. They wield resources and they wield influence, and what they decide to do with it right now. So much of what happens next is going to be dependent upon them.
So another quick question, I hope, because I want to wrap up one other thing. What do you say to white people who are willing allies but feel lumped into the category with white people who are reluctant and or refuse to be allies? Mm-hmm. You know, I think there was another part that someone else shared, or how to deal with people that think that we're in a post-racial world and that economic disparity is a real problem. I mean, like, how do you?
So this is two-part. First of all, I love this question because these are the folks that we're getting ready to launch again. We have a Reflecting on Whiteness series that we run at my campus, and we're getting folks together. But what it is it's for white identified colleagues to spend time together, having these difficult conversations with one another. People that go through that always end up being transformed. They end up being the transformative allies, and they're what I call the seeds in every single department or wherever. They're the ones that blossom. So much good stuff blossoms because of who they are and how they approach the work. But one of the things, this is going to be a little bit of challenging, but hang with me here. As a white ally, you also have to be able to acknowledge that in your life, and unconsciously and unintentionally, that you have also been Amy Cooper, male or female, or gender nonconforming person. So there's a little bit of that honesty, because that was the second thing that I wanted to do here. And this is something you can do with yourself, and you can do it with perhaps with some of your closest and best white friends and family members. There is a little bit of holding that, because we would not be where we're at right now as a nation if we had not bought into the comfort and the benefits that comes with the racialized privilege that whiteness provides, okay? So that's the first part. And this is not an admonishment. This is from someone who works closely with individuals to help them build their capacity. So I'm saying this quite lovingly. And because I'm saying it out of love, I have to be honest. So you have to be able to, first of all, not look at her and point to her and say, bad Amy. I'm sure Amy is a very nice woman, and I'm sure, she has found herself in a very unfortunate situation to have had her behaviors caught on camera when she's probably saying every white person I know has probably behaved one way or another in some small way, and she unfortunately has become the poster child of this. So you have to hold that first. Acknowledgement is the first step to change. Then the other piece then is you have to then continue to be committed to educating yourself, educate those around you that you feel that you can, and that you will then use your privilege in ways that you can. Now, when someone says something and it hurts your feelings, someone says something and you're like, stop throwing me in that group. I'm not that person. The former thing that I said will hopefully help you be able to manage that a little bit better. You have to come up with your own line to be able to say, I can understand why you would say that. Let me tell you how I've worked for racial justice. And then you can start talking about it. And as you talk about the things that you do, you're also educating and broadcasting to other people who you are. But I want to say that I can understand the difficulty and how difficult that must feel when you have been working for these issues and you feel that you are being unfairly blamed for something. And until we can all understand and move from this, what I call this current individualized frame, and begin to keep our focus on systemic racism. You notice I try to focus on systemic racism and not so much on individuals. This thing of systemic racism, and start talking about it, and how does it show up where you work or in your profession. Institutionalized racism. Talk about institutionalized racism. Read some of the resources that will be sent out to you and the resource list that will be attached with this recording. All of those things will begin to help you to be able to navigate and negotiate this. And I will say this, for anybody that's sick of seeing 2 weeks of protesting in the streets of the United States and throughout the world, just imagine what generations of African Americans have held for 400 years of policy that has not put us at the center, and at times dehumanized us, and to the point that we were not even considered full human beings. And so whatever trials and tribulations people find themselves carrying, part of the work right now is that all of us are being called to carry our cross. And I really think that white people of conscience are being called to carry their cross for justice. They're being called to carry their cross for racial justice. They're being called to carry their weight so that there's a, you know, you're a lawyer. What is it called, Tracy? The balance of justice, the lady that carries it?
Lady Liberty?
Lady Liberty. You know, there has got to be
Scales of justice.
The scales of justice are not going to be realized until more people who are privileged pick up their portion of the weight, so that there's a balance, and then we might be able to move toward some reconciliation and some real change.
I don't want to get all emotional, so pull myself together. I just want to, I don't know, I think, Chris, where are you? I think that got to all the questions in the chat, and
Yes.
I could literally spend 3 days with you and that still wouldn't be enough. I think the part about all of us being asked to carry our crosses is significant. And I think that in higher education, we have a tendency to assume that we are all in this space of openness and open-mindedness and willing to learn, and that is not true. Yeah. And so I definitely appreciate everyone being in this space. But I appreciate you taking time out of your very, very busy, very, very busy schedule for us at the University of the Pacific, specifically. We just appreciate your wisdom. We appreciate your guidance, but also appreciate your candor and your honesty, because we need to be pushed, even those of us who look like us, to use our voices and to use our power, whether that be in our decision-making, in our management positions, in our communities, our churches, synagogues, mosque, etc. And so I just want to say, like, with a wholehearted thanks, like, if I could hug you, I probably wouldn't let go for a long time, because I needed this today. And I know our community did, so sorry. So thank you so much, and look forward to working with you. And just an FYI, the words about you came from Stephanie Carlos in law school, who's so grateful to you and your presence and your wisdom and your guidance and all that you bring to the table. So thank you so much. And
Stephanie Carlos is one assistant dean at your colleague at the USF Law School.
Yeah,
she's awesome.
She's amazing.
Yes,
she's an amazing human.
Yes,
and we are sisters.
And I do a lot with the law students. And when you and I should spend some time, I'll tell you what I did, what I've done with the USF Law students. I put them all through some microaggressions training.
Oh, well, we definitely could use that. I do want to point out for the alumni staff. And Dr. Wardell, that, one comment was, is this something that we can share with the university staff, all staff? And I will just say, from a perspective of someone who's done diversity work and is now just responsible for admissions and financial aid, that I do think that part of the challenge is that there's a lot of thought in education about requiring trainings and how people view that and whether they take it seriously when they're forced to go. I'm not saying that that's not something that the university should not consider,
Yeah.
but I definitely think for all of us in our different workspaces, we know how mandatory trainings sometimes are perceived. And in the space of race and justice and equity and inclusion and diversity and microaggressions and intersectionality and all those things, that is particularly challenging. Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Wardell, if you have any parting thoughts about how we should be thinking about that as we go back into our different divisions and departments and schools, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, that sentiment of mandatory, you know, that goes back to the individualism frame, that frame of being an individual. You can't tell me what I have to do, even though you do have to pay your taxes. You do need to stop at a red light. You know, there's things that we actually do, but we want to claim our right to individuality when it comes to building our capacity as a member of a community, organization, institution, for being a better person around these ideas of being more inclusive. I don't want anybody to demand that I do that. That there is, it's part of the sin sickness. You know, even that in and of itself is an unconscious racism. If anybody has ever said it, I don't want to have to do that, there is an undertone of an unconscious racism that's operating within them. And part of the work that I will say again is that if not now, when? If we do not respond to this moment that we have not seen, many of us on this call have not seen anything like this in our lifetimes. We have not had anything like this since Dr. King was alive and was through the civil rights movement in the mid-60s, in the early 60s. And so here we are in 2020. If we do not respond, particularly those of us, and there's various degrees of institutional actors. There's institutional actors at the top and the middle, and those of us that, you know, throughout the institution. If we do not respond now, when will we respond? And so that's that. So I'm not going to say that we, you know, yes or no around that question. It's really a question that if not now, when? What set of circumstances, what context, how much more bloodshed do you need to see? How much more proof do we need to have that the society has not been set up equal? And it was never set up equal from the beginning. And so we have to take equitable steps to address that. And some of those equitable steps sometimes is that you do more for those needed most. And some of those equitable steps is that, and I'll just share real quick, I'm just going to end with this letter that went out to every faculty, staff, and student and alumni. We went out to thousands of people at 9 a.m. this morning. It's an open letter to Black identified students, faculty, staff, alumni, and their allies. While the events of the last week have been painful and traumatic for so many of us, they have brought forward the devastating impacts of police violence against African Americans in this country. As campus leaders, it is important that we speak out against the relentless atrocities that we are bearing witness to that are unjust and inhumane. Therefore, the leadership of the University of San Francisco condemns police brutality, institutionalized racism, white supremacy, and systemic social injustices that have led to the deaths of too many Black people in the US and globally. We grieve and stand with the family of Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered while jogging in Georgia by two white men. We stand with Christian Cooper, who was the victim of a white woman's attempt to use the police as a weapon against him as he was bird watching in New York City Central Park. We stand with Breonna Taylor, an essential worker during this pandemic, who was killed in her home by police. We stand with George Floyd. who was senselessly killed by a Minneapolis police officer, while onlookers begged the officer to release the pressure from his neck. And as Mr. Floyd spoke the same words as Eric Gardner, who was similarly slain, "I can't breathe." We affirm that Black lives matter, and we stand in solidarity with those who protest injustice and rise up against dehumanization. We affirm and embrace the tenets of racial justice taught by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and brought alive at USF through our Institute for Nonviolence and Social Justice. We stand with the Black Student Union at the University of San Francisco in making this statement in response to their demands. We affirm and support their desire to lead USF to new ways of living, learning, and working together as a community. We cannot forget that our commitment to living a faith that does justice is rooted in narratives of liberation of the oppressed. The institutionalized racism and white supremacy that pervades our culture is antithetical to the Jesuit values that define USF. As members of the university leadership, we will reflect on the times that we have not supported or actively responded to Black identified students, faculty, and staff when they have engaged in anti-racist activism or called out racist policies and practices. We know actions speak more loudly than words, and that as a university, we must embody the values we profess through concrete actions of solidarity for and with those resisting anti-Black violence in this moment. We recognize that our Black colleagues, our Black students, and our Black alumni may have lived with high levels of uncertainty and anxiety at the hands of our silence, our complicity, and our exclusion. We have heard this, yet our responses need to be different. Our responses must be aligned with the depth and the significance of the reality Black people have long experienced. We pledge as leaders to listen more intently in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead, and to work to implement concrete change in our community. We commit to become race conscious and equity minded in our leadership practice, including our decision making, management oversight, and policy development. We commit to doing the hard yet necessary work to uncover our own biases, our own prejudices, and unintentional yet complicit behaviors that harm Black people and hold us back in becoming allies individually and collectively. We commit to always working with humility toward equity in our community, knowing that this is a constant self-reflective work in progress. We commit to our goal of working toward an even better and more productive understanding of how our values and our mission can be put into action to end anti-Black racism. I'm almost done. We promise to follow up with the information on specific actions and plans, and we will work with the members of our community and provide a timeline for immediate actions this summer and throughout the fall semester and beyond. We promise to involve and collaborate with our community of faculty, staff, students, and alumni in developing and communicating these specific actions in solidarity. I'll just tell you the titles and not the names. The president, the provost, all 6 deans, all 6 vice provosts, all 6 vice presidents, and general counsel, along with the director of university ministry. So that is how you begin this work. You begin by making a commitment and you put it in writing, and then you say, I'm going to follow up on it, because now you just put yourself on the hook because the community is going to hold you accountable to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right.
Kelly?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to, again, my deepest gratitude, Mary and Tracy, both of you, for joining us today and being with us and talking us through this. And Tracy, I think you said it perfectly. Mary, thank you for your candor and honesty, and helping us maybe to understand how we can be those transformative allies, and helping in this. I think the alumni relations staff at University of the Pacific would like to continue on that journey. And if there is an opportunity, or you think that we should could continue, not should, but could continue this conversation. I know you, Mary, and Tracy are both very, very busy, not only in your work, but in your personal lives right now because of where we are in the world. So if we can have that conversation and continue this, we would love to work with you. So thank you again.
Thank you for creating this space.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.